Generalizations are, of course, always inadequate, but if you ask me on this feast of Saints Peter and Paul, in general, it's fair to say that each of us are a bit more like Peter or a bit more like St. Paul. What about you? I mean, from what you know of them, do you think you're a bit more like St. Peter or like St. Paul? We'll take a look first at Paul and what he was like. I think this is a fair summary of him. Not only did St. Paul not get it from the beginning, St. Paul was the last person on earth anyone thought would ever be proclaiming the good news of Jesus. St. Paul himself thought he was the last person who would ever do this. In the vigil readings, he says of himself, "For you knew of my former way of life in Jerusalem, how I persecuted the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it." Yikes. So, I mean, maybe you are like St. Paul, not that bad, but still, there's some part of you which kind of came late to the party, so to speak. And perhaps there are a few folks who from time to time would be, at least at some point in your life, have been a bit shocked to have seen you walk through the doors of church. So perhaps you're a bit like St. Paul. Or perhaps you're a bit more like St. Peter. Now, Peter seemed to get it from the beginning. When Jesus called him, he jumped in with both feet. Later in the scriptures, we hear him literally jump in with both feet. And then he just kept bungling it. I mean, he started out great, but then he would mess up again and again. After this lovely moment in the gospel where Jesus praises him for getting it, the very next little story will tell Jesus having to chastise him for completely missing the point. Maybe you're a bit more like Peter. You know, you've been in it from the beginning, but you keep kind of messing up on one level or another. So, Paul, late to the party, then fervent. Peter, there from the beginning, messing it up. How amazing and even wonderful, then, that the church holds up for us two obviously and deeply flawed people as heroes, as saints even. I'll say it again. How wonderful that the church holds up two such obviously and deeply flawed humans as heroes, as saints even. Perhaps there are two key things for us to learn here. First, if God could use those guys, then God could use you, and God could use me. The same Spirit of Christ that was in them is in you, is in me. Whether we're late to the party or there from the beginning and often bungling it, that same Spirit is in us. Secondly, if God could use those guys, as flawed as they are, and to speak what we need to hear down through the centuries, then God can use other flawed and imperfect people through whom to speak a message that we need to hear. Which means, just as we cannot write ourselves off, we cannot write others off just because of their imperfections. I think there's something in us that doesn't like that very much. It's a little bit easier, convenient, to think of saints as some otherworldly, perfect creatures out there. Because one, we could never be like that. And two, then I don't have to listen to somebody else who's imperfect, but through whom God might be trying to speak a message to me. So, about us, We can sometimes forget that a good and noble life is an ongoing effort. Virtue is always developed over time, and with many a setback, many a failure, as we work through all the messes and mistakes and blessings at all stages and ages of life. Similarly, we can't simply write someone off because of their imperfections. The integrity of a person and their importance cannot be judged by this moment or this flaw. If, and here's a key sentence, please, if what they are telling us aligns with what Jesus lived, what Jesus proclaimed, then we need to hear it, faults and all. Now, the key thing, of course, is if it aligns with what Jesus lived, and you want to know that, read through the Gospels. If it aligns with what Jesus lived and what he proclaimed, then we got to listen to it, faults or not. I'll give you two examples. First, Mother Teresa. So many people saw the holiness of her life. My goodness, she would spend hours before the Blessed Sacrament in prayer. She formed a religious community to care for the destitute and poor. She would spend her days in the gutters of Calcutta, cradling people who were dying, smelly, just to give them some comfort at the end. And people, said she should be named a saint, rightly so. Then after her death, we found her journal and found out that for 50 years, faith was hard for her. That God felt far away, that she doubted this thing, that she even resented how hard that was for her, and sometimes had a certain bitterness. There were a few who thought, well, therefore she shouldn't be named a saint in light of that. That's because they don't get it. I would argue all the reason more for her to be a saint. Matter of fact, she is even more inspiring to me because she just kept doing the best she could in the darkness. I love that. Secondly, Dr. Martin Luther King, whose prophetic voice called us to see the racism inherent in society and often in our hearts, and who called us to do the difficult work of building a more just world for all. Now, he had his obvious faults. Two I know: ego, marital infidelity. That does not mean I can write off his message about justice, racism, human dignity. I don't have to listen to what he said because, look, he's imperfect. Wrong. I do, because guess what? What he said was so very aligned with what Jesus said, so very aligned with what Jesus lived. That's the criteria. So that's it. To end, some of you know that my definition of a saint is a sinner who just kept trying. It was a truth for Peter. It was a truth for Paul. It's a truth for each of God's children. Saints are sinners like us who just kept trying.